I've never been a tech-savvy person. While everyone else raved about the latest iPhones and gadgets from Samsung, I was content with my battered BlackBerry. Eventually, I had to switch to an iPhone, not because I wanted to, but because the BlackBerry became obsolete. So when I decided to install a Ring doorbell, it was completely out of character. Part of me wishes I had stayed the clueless hermit I was before. My mental health might have been better off. When I moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin, security was my top priority. I lived alone for most of my life, and my paranoia drove me to invest in a digital security system. That's how I stumbled on the Ring doorbell. It seemed like the smart choice, or so I thought. At first, I was diligent. Every day after work, I'd review the footage from the doorbell camera. But there was never anything on it. Just empty streets and the occasional stray cat. I started checking the footage less frequently. The motion sensors, though, were particularly irksome. My patience wore thin with every alert I got. It was always that blasted cat, a gray tubby that seemed to have it out for me. I daydreamed about taking a sledgehammer to it. One night, I was in the middle of a deep sleep. The motion alert pinged on my phone. My frustration was instant. I am going to skin that cat, I thought as I fumbled for my phone. Groggy and irritated, I unlocked it and tapped on the motion alert notification. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. The street video feed was in black and white, a grainy, eerie snapshot of the trees in front of my house, rustling leaves in the wind, but then I saw it. A figure moving towards my doorway. No, not just a person. A clown, dressed in a tattered polka-dotted jumpsuit, face painted with a grotesque, unnerving grin, and holding 4 black balloons that seemed to float in the moonlight like malevolent eyes. My grip on my phone tightened, and an icy chill shot through me. My heart pounded as the clown continued his slow, deliberate approach. He wasn't just strolling, he was lingering, as if savoring every moment of his trespass. My breaths came in shallow gasps, and I felt paralyzed, my mind racing through irrational fears. What if the clown could reach through the screen? A rational part of me tried to stay calm, insisting it was just a twisted prank. But the rationality of my mind crumbles when faced with raw fear. I watched in horror as the clown stood on my doorstep, his head swiveling side to side as if searching for something or someone. The idea of facing this unsettling intruder was unbelievable, but I knew I had to act. I told myself that if I stayed in the house, he might find a way inside. I needed to confront him. I crept out of my bed, my phone still clutched tightly. The clown's gaze seemed to follow me through the screen. I had imagined his eyes were boring into me, even though they were hidden behind the paint. The old floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I made my way to the kitchen. There, I retrieved a knife from the drawer, its cold steel providing a false sense of security. With the knife in hand, I felt a shaky courage surge through me. I was no longer a terrified observer. I was a defender of my home. I gripped the knife tightly, determined to confront this bizarre menace. I approached the door, my breath shallow and rapid. "Get the hell away from my door!" I shouted, my voice cracking. In the video, the clown's head tilted, and he stared directly into the camera. The intensity of his gaze was unnerving, like he was peering straight into my soul. The clown's response was chilling, guttural laugh that seemed to reverberate through the night air. His laughter grew louder and more frenzied as he slowly began to retreat. The sound of his laughter was mixed with a distant rustling of the trees, curated an eerie symphony that echoed in my ear. I stood there trembling, watching as he disappeared into the darkness. The unsettling silence that followed was oppressive. I felt like an idiot, an irrational fool who had nearly been driven mad by a clown. I stood by the door, the knife clutched in my hand, staring at the empty street. My phone pinged again, but I didn't dare look at it. Instead, I waited for dawn to break, too terrified to sleep and too ashamed to admit how close I'd come to losing my sanity. The next morning, the camera footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. The clown, the balloons, the sinister grin, everything had vanished, leaving me with nothing but an unnerving memory and a lingering sense of dread. I had been watched, taunted, and ultimately left to question my own sanity. Now, whenever I hear the rustling of leaves or see a flash of color in the darkness, I am reminded of that night. I never found out who the clown was or what his intentions were, but I know one thing for certain. Sometimes, the things we can't understand are the ones that haunt us the most. Though certain elements have been established for dramatic effect, this story is based on a real event that happened in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where a homeowner's Ring doorbell camera captured a clown approaching the home. In the black and white video, you can see the clown holding black balloons and creeping around the front door before leaving. What was he there to do exactly remains unclear. That summer of 2022, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and my life hasn't been the same since. I'm not sure whose idea it was, but both of us were excited to do it. Pete and I had been friends since we were kids. We went everywhere together, and it was rare to see one without the other. The best of friends. When you are 15 years old, the world feels like your oyster. You might be aware of dangers adults talk about, but a thin film of naivety clouds your vision, making it impossible to truly understand or be afraid. That's what led us to the dark web. We knew it was dangerous, but that only fueled our curiosity. Imagine the numbers the channel would pull, Pete said. I know, bro. I can see us making millions from this, I responded. Our plan was set. Soon we would be kings of YouTube. Everything was ready. I shook Pete's hand and watched him retreat down the road to his house. We would do it tonight. I rushed through dinner. My parents noticed. Slow down, Mike. The food isn't going anywhere, my mom said with a smile. Teenagers, my dad said with a smirk. I polished off the rest of my meatloaf and hurried to my room. Pete was already waiting for me. I video called him on Skype, and he was in his pajamas, sitting in front of his computer. He smiled when he saw me. Let's get rich! I grinned back and started the screen share. Our plan was simple. Explore the dark web and upload what we found on our fledgling YouTube channel. We knew it would succeed because people are drawn to dangerous things that aren't good for them. At first we encountered many dead links. Sites didn't stay up forever on the dark web. Sometimes their creators got arrested, or worse. But a few minutes in, and we started seeing what we had come for. The first was a site full of gory crime scene photos. We quickly exited. We didn't want anything that would get our channel banned. The second site we found was called The Playground. There were probably 1 million links, with no explanation for what they were. You think we should check them out? I asked Pete. We should, but I'm worried some of them could be viruses, he responded. Well, this computer is old. It might as well go out with a bang, I declared, moving the mouse to hover over a link. I clicked it. The screen darkened for a second, and then displayed a video game. Sad Satan. I had heard of it before. Everyone who knew a little about the dark web had. We're not playing that, Pete said, shaking his head. But I began before Pete cut me off. Nah, man, we are not playing that. It's messed up. I knew arguing was pointless, so reluctantly, I closed the game, thinking it would have made for great content. I picked another link at random on the playground. This one led us to a live video feed. The lighting was very clear, unlike most of the grainy videos you'd expect. It was a dorm room of some kind. The walls were pristine white, and the floor was tile. I could see close to 12 bunk beds, all occupied. There were other people walking around in the room. My jaw dropped. It was the same guy. Mid-20s, a patchy beard, ragged clothes. There was no mistake. Every single person in the room looked the same. Not in a they look so alike way. It was literally the same person, lying in the beds and moving around the room. What the hell? Pete exclaimed, echoing my thoughts. This was no case of twins or sextuplets. It was the same guy. I wanted to get a closer look. My heart was beating fast with equal parts excitement and fear. I moved the mouse to enlarge the screen. Abruptly, the feed cut off. My computer went haywire. The music player opened up on its own, blasting a song I'd been listening to earlier. Applications opened and closed on the taskbar, and the Skype call ended, leaving me with a last glimpse of Pete's perplexed face. I saw smoke starting to effuse from the computer, so I quickly unplugged it. It went silent. I stood there, panting. What the hell was happening? Who had that been on the video? I was about to call Pete when my phone started ringing. It was a private number, with the details hidden. Stay away from the dark web. The voice was menacing, like granite meeting a drill. We know who you are, and where you are. Stay away, or you'll end up like your friend. The call cut off. A cold entered my bloodstream, and I shivered involuntarily. What did they mean by, end up like your friend? I ran downstairs, concerned for Pete, but my heart fell when I realized the door was already locked. My dad had a simple policy. We don't open the door at night once it's locked. I could try to tell him it was an emergency, but I didn't understand what was happening myself. Reluctantly, I went back to my room and called Pete. No answer. I must have tried 1,000 times, but still got no response. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep that night. I was a tight bundle of terror, expecting faceless people to break into my room at any minute. The second I woke up, I headed to Pete's house. I got there in record time and leapt off my bike like a Hollywood stuntman. I banged loudly on the door. What the hell? Pete opened the door. He was fine. I sighed in relief and hugged him. Hey, dude, what's wrong? Sorry, man. I thought something had happened to you. Huh? He looked at me in confusion. Yesterday, after that video we saw, they didn't call you? What are you talking about? Yesterday I slept early. I didn't see any video. I looked at Pete in mounting confusion. I could tell he was being genuine and not messing with me, but how could he not remember? At that moment, an unmarked van passed in front of Pete's house. I turned to look. A man in a black suit and sunglasses sat in the shotgun seat. He held his 2 fingers to his head, mimicking a gun, and stared at us as the van passed. Huh? That's weird, Pete remarked nonchalantly. I stood there, numb. The speed at which they had gotten in touch, Pete's sudden amnesia. Only some really powerful people had those kinds of resources. Powerful people. Like the government. I just watched as the van disappeared into the distance. It wasn't my first time babysitting, but it was the first time I'd been offered that kind of money. I couldn't wait to get started. The woman on the phone had said to meet her at Gray Lake Motel, but as I stood outside, I thought I must be in the wrong place. The motel looked seedy, like something out of a bad horror movie. Broken bottles littered the ground. A trash can had spilled its contents all over the parking lot. And the smell. I nearly gagged. This couldn't be it. I pulled out my phone and double-checked. Yep, Gray Lake Motel. But why would they want to meet here? Mr. and Mrs. Granger seemed like wealthy people, considering how much they were willing to pay me to babysit. What were they doing at a place like this? A nervous part of me whispered that I should leave, but I brushed it off. There had to be a reasonable explanation. So I made my way inside. The interior was worse. The smell of stale beer and sweat was overpowering. I found myself in front of a wooden door labeled Room 22 and took a deep breath, almost turning back, but I needed the money. You can do this, Tasha, I told myself, trying to muster confidence. I knocked softly, and the woman called, "Come in." I pushed the door open. Mr. and Mrs. Granger were sitting at a table, but their appearance caught me off guard. They looked pale and sickly, like they hadn't seen the sun in years. "You must be Tasha," Mrs. Granger said, smiling as she reached out to shake my hand. Her skin was cold and clammy. "Tasha?" Mr. Granger echoed, sizing me up with a look that made my stomach twist. "Yes?" he muttered to himself. "She'll do nicely." The way she said it made my skin crawl, and I almost walked out. But then Mrs. Granger spoke up, gesturing to a chair. "Please, take a seat, Tasha." Reluctantly, I sat down. "I'm sorry, but our ad might have been a little misleading," Mrs. Granger said, her gaze steady. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "We really need you to do this for us, Tasha. If you don't, our children will end up on the streets," she continued, her eyes sad. My confusion grew. "I already agreed to babysit for you. Are you saying you can't pay me what you agreed on?" I asked, irritation creeping into my voice. "Oh, where are our manners?" Mr. Granger interrupted, getting a Coke from the small fridge. "Here, have one." Not wanting to be rude, I took a sip. The taste was strange. There was a bitter aftertaste that I couldn't place. Mrs. Granger's tone shifted. "The job has changed a bit, dear," she said with an eerie smile. I opened my mouth to respond, but I couldn't. My face felt hot, my limbs heavy. I realized too late what had happened. The Coke. I'd been drugged. I staggered towards the door, desperate to escape. The Grangers watched me unmoved. Just as I'd reached the handle to pull the door open, I saw why they hadn't bothered to stop me. A man in his 50s with a greasy grin blocked the doorway. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "Oh, she's perfect," he smirked, dragging me back into the room. I tried to resist, but my body wouldn't obey. Helplessly, I watched as he handed a wad of cash to Mr. Granger. I understood then, with bone-deep horror, exactly what was happening. I had heard stories of human trafficking, chilling tales of people being locked up in basements and getting sold to the highest bidder. But it's one of those things that you never think will happen to you. What came after, I'll never tell anyone. The horror is too much. I remember crying when he left, and Mrs. Granger's voice telling me to get over it. The drugs kept me disoriented, unable to tell what was real and what wasn't. Each day brought a new stranger. It was different faces, but they were all alike. Soulless monsters who were more than happy to pay for their dark pleasures to my equally soulless captors. Greasy hands, stale breath. That's all that could break through the drug-induced haze that characterized my existence. It felt like years, but I knew it couldn't have been more than 2 weeks. I cried myself to sleep each night, praying for a way out. And then, one day, the chance came. The Grangers had doped themselves up on the same drugs they forced on me, and they were dead asleep. I slipped out of the motel, barely daring to believe I was free. When I saw the sun, I nearly broke down. But there wasn't time. I needed to find help. I needed to do it fast. I ran to a nearby gas station, where the shocked attendant handed me a phone. I dialed 911, and for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt hope. To cut a long story short, the Grangers were arrested and imprisoned. They had me in that dingy motel for 10 days, selling my body to their unscrupulous customers. Everyone who had heard the story wanted them hanged. That was 5 years ago. I was 17 then. I'm 22 now, but I'm still healing from that nightmare.
My car wouldn't start. I turned the key in the ignition a few more times before slamming my fist onto the steering wheel. The car let out a loud honk, and a couple of kids playing in the park adjacent to the parking bay turned to look. It was a nice day out. The sun shining brightly, the air abuzz with the sound of music, laughter, and conversation. The light and beauty of the morning were a sharp contrast to the darkness in my soul. Out of all the days to have car trouble, this was the worst. I only had one shot at this, one chance to make things right, or I would never be able to rest until the day I died. Suddenly, a memory rose unbidden to the surface of my mind. My daughter, running towards me in a bright yellow dress, her pigtails swinging in the summer breeze. "I love you, Daddy!" I could almost hear her soft voice in the car, feel the warm sensation of her tiny palms against my cheeks. I opened my eyes with an effort, forcing myself to disengage from the memory. Now was the time for action, not reminiscing. I exited the car and retrieved my suitcase from the trunk, grunting at its weight. I could still make it on time if I caught the next train out. I flagged a taxi and asked the driver to take me to the train station. He tried to make polite conversation, but soon gave up when he realized I was barely responding, my mind too keyed up. It didn't take long to secure a seat on the train. A twinge of worry went through me when they spent a little too much time looking at my suitcase, but that dissipated immediately when they checked it in. The train left the station, bringing me one step closer to my goal. For the past 3 years, I had been scouring the dark web in search of special people. I knew all about the hitmen, the drug deals, and the torture rooms. And while all of it terrified me, what I was looking for was much worse. They called themselves gentlemen, and they liked hurting children. Sure, the dark web was chock full of inappropriate content featuring children, but these guys took it a step further. They were like a secret society whose creed was to hurt the innocent. 3 grueling years of life like an animal, filthy and unkempt, scarfing down fast food as I typed into my computer. The dark web became familiar to me, like the back of my hand. The Tor tab remained perpetually on my taskbar. People stopped talking to me, and I understood them. I had bags under my eyes. I stank to high heaven, and I'm sure I came across as deranged. But I didn't care. I couldn't afford to. Finally, I had done it. I found the gentleman, and just in time, too. Every year, they held a convention of sorts, where each member brought a contribution. They would call themselves Red Drives, and they were just that. Hard drives full of horrific content the gentlemen produced themselves. It was a big event for them. They would get to socialize, share ideas, and explore their macabre interests. After 3 years of painstaking work that eroded pieces of my soul with each day that passed, I knew where the gentleman would be. The train sped through the countryside like a bullet through a green quilt, slicing effortlessly through the fields and forests, its rhythmic clatter a steady heartbeat against the tranquil landscape. I opened my window slightly, letting the wind rush in. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet scent of nature. It reminded me of my Cassandra. It was almost full dark when I arrived. The meeting place was a towering Gothic mansion on a verdant estate. There was already someone at the gate, ready to help me with my luggage. I adjusted the straps of my gas mask as he approached. Anonymity was key in spaces such as these. He too wore a ski mask. We walked to the mansion in silence. I followed him into a large hall where more than 30 people were already gathered. All were wearing masks of one design or another. You could almost touch the excitement in the air. Our host stood on a dais and bellowed to get our attention. He was a pudgy man in a black tux and a pighead mask. I found myself a seat and listened to him go through the introductions. He made a long-winded speech about the beauty of our society and the sanctity of our unusual tastes. I tuned him out. The moment he called for our first contributor, I was up. 36 masked face stared at me as I dragged my suitcase to the dais. I have looked for you people for so many years. We, in here, we are all alike. We will go to any lengths to achieve our goals. My voice was slow and steady. The gentleman cheered. If people knew what was about to happen here, they would try to stop it. They would be horrified and disgusted, but I learned a long time ago that it doesn't matter what people think. They cheered again. I opened my suitcase. Let us begin.
Hey, what?
The host began before he stumbled and fell onto his knees. All around the room, people were toppling out of their chairs. They all stared at me in confusion, their terrified eyes glued to the metal axe I had taken out of my suitcase. You all have been inhaling paralysine from the moment I arrived. It's undetectable and it works fast. Don't worry, you're not going to pass out. The gas only makes it impossible for you to move, but you'll be fully conscious and you can feel. It's very important that you can feel. My tone was conversational and light, with no hint at all of the hellish rage that burned at my core. 36 pairs of eyes stared at me in terror from the different angles on the floor, and I grinned. I hefted the axe and went to work. The host tried to wriggle away like a worm. He let out a whoosh of pain when the axe went a bit into his torso. He couldn't scream, but he could feel the pain. My second swing split his skull under the pig mask. Blood flowed in rivulets from his twitching body. I was already moving to the next person. The whole thing must have taken me 30 minutes. When my arms got tired from swinging the axe, I went back to my suitcase and took out 2 curry knives. With these, I moved through the mess of paralyzed gentlemen, slitting their throats like livestock at an abattoir. I felt nothing as the blades bit into their unresisting flesh. I watched, numb, as the floor turned into a crimson lake. I was panting. Over 30 people in one go was no easy feat. But the job wasn't over. I retrieved the 5-liter jerry can of gasoline from my suitcase and started pouring it all over the bodies. I poured some on the huge pile of luggage as well. The gentleman's trove of red drives, their contributions, The police found me standing before the burning mansion, laughing maniacally. I couldn't answer any of their questions. The smell of the burning wood made tears of catharsis drip from my eyes like spring rain on parched earth.
Being a parent is sometimes a nightmare. You're constantly worrying about your children's welfare, always trying to do right by them and protect them. It's a full-time job. Nothing is more unsettling than realizing something could have happened to your babies. Except maybe the idea of someone missing out on awesome content by not subscribing to this channel. So don't miss out. Like and subscribe. What do we do when something's wrong? We call 911. Mom, we got this. You can go, said Carly, my eldest daughter. At 16, Carly was in charge of her sister and brother, while my husband Ben and I went on a trip. I had drilled everything into her, but my heart was still uneasy. Honey, let's go! They'll be okay! Ben shouted from the driveway where he was backing out our SUV. Reluctantly, I grabbed my purse and we made our way out. Ethan and Sandy ran into my arms. Bring us ice cream, Mom, they both chimed, tripping over each other. Don't worry, babies. I'll bring you some ice cream, I promised, kissing them both before getting into the car. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back and see all three of our children waving goodbye. I smiled, in spite myself. Ben and I were attending a convention out of state, which meant leaving the kids alone. It wasn't the first time, but I was still worried. The drive to the airport was uncomfortable for me, filled with anxiety, but I started to relax once we got on the plane. Ever since Carly had gone missing for 6 hours when she was 10, I've been paranoid about my kids. Ben always teases me about it, but he understands. When we arrived at the convention, the host was already giving a speech. We hurriedly took our seats, apologizing as we passed. I grabbed my phone and shot Carly a text. All good at home? The reply came minutes later. All good, Mom. Enjoy the convention. Reassured, I put my phone away and started listening. You'd think a tech conversation would be fun, but it was mostly a bunch of speeches about concepts I didn't understand. The tech stuff was Ben's area. I was just there for moral support. The whole day dragged on, and I found myself getting bored. By the time the last speaker left the podium, I was ready to bolt. Our hotel was close to the convention center, so it took less than 5 minutes to get there by taxi. The fatigue from traveling and sitting around all day was catching up to me. The moment we checked into our room, I took a quick shower and slid right into bed. Sorry, I can't stay up with you, sweetheart. I apologize. Don't worry about it, Ben said with a smile, kissing my forehead. Within seconds, I was asleep. I woke up to the shrill sound of an alarm on my phone. Immediately, my blood turned to ice. I knew what that alarm meant. My hand reached into the darkness, and I switched on the bedside lamp. Ben was up as well, sitting next to me, his face mirroring the horror on mine. Motion detected at the front door. That's what the notification said. I clicked on it with shaky fingers, and it shifted the screen showing the front of our house. We had installed a Ring doorbell camera a few months ago, and now what we dreaded most was displayed in real time on my phone. A figure was slowly inching towards the door. Ben and I stared, frozen, our hearts pounding with fear. The man moved into the range of the light from above the door, and we could see him clearly now. He was in his 30s, with a slight beard, dressed in dark colors. He put his hands on the doorbell, but he didn't ring it. It looked like he was trying to find purchase on its surface, as though he wanted to tamper with it. The breath caught in my throat. I could clearly imagine him ripping the doorbell out, charging in and hurting my babies. 911! I managed to croak. Ben blinked, snapping out of his fear-induced trance. He quickly grabbed his phone and started dialing 911. On the screen, the intruder moved his head towards the doorbell. My heart rate spiked. He opened his mouth and started licking the doorbell. My eyes widened in terror and confusion. Suddenly, the phone screen went dark. My heart dropped as I realized the battery was dead. The panic surged through me. No, no, no! I gasped desperately, trying to turn the phone back on. Ben's face was a mask of dread as we both fumbled in the dimly lit room, our movements frantic. In the confusion, we both forgot about Ben's phone. I scrambled to find the charger. The room felt like it was closing in on us, each second dragging on painfully. "Where's the charger?" I shouted, my voice breaking. Ben started searching through our bags, his hands shaking. Every second felt like an eternity. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer. The menacing visage of a man on the camera replayed in my mind. My thoughts raced. What if he was breaking in right now? What if the kids were in danger? After what felt like an age, Ben finally found the charger and plugged it in. I watched as my phone screen flickered back to life. Relief and dread mingled in my chest as the camera feed reappeared. The man was still there, his face smeared with saliva, his eyes now fixated directly on the camera. The man had shifted his behavior. He wasn't just licking the doorbell, now he was devouring it, his lips stretching to unbelievable proportions. His movements were erratic, as if he were performing some twisted ritual. Even though the sound was garbled, probably due to the poor connection, whispers were coming through. Play with me. The sounds of his whispers, combined with the sight of his deranged face, was enough to make me feel physically sick. My hands trembled as I watched him circle the door, a grotesque grin spreading across his face. We watched the creepy feed for 3 hours, glued to the screen like moths to a flame. Finally, the man took one last look at the camera before vanishing into the night, leaving behind an eerie silence and a smeared doorbell camera. Ben and I were left shaken, barely able to comprehend the horror we just witnessed. The following morning, we were on the first plane back home. The kids welcomed us with hugs, oblivious to the nightmare we endured. The police assured us they were on the lookout for the man, but no answers were forthcoming. By the time they had arrived at our home, the man had already disappeared. Despite their reassurances, the terror of that night lingered. Each time I hear the doorbell ring, a cold shiver runs down my spine, and I am haunted by the thought that he is still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to return. As ridiculous as this story might sound, it's actually based on a real event that took place in California back in 2019. A Ring doorbell camera caught a man licking a doorbell at a stranger's house for 3 hours straight. Of all the crazy things caught on Ring doorbell cameras, this definitely takes the cake. There was a ferocious pounding against the door. "Open this door, or we're all going to die." The voice from the other side was hoarse, eerie, a chilling echo like something from a horror movie, not a person. I muttered, regretting the series of mistakes that led me here. If you're confused, I get it. Let me take you back where this all began. My name is Bella. I'm 22. And last week, I got my first job. Well, calling it a job is generous, but it pays. I never pictured myself as a babysitter, but with college coming up and bills piling up, I couldn't exactly afford to be picky. So I found myself working for the Jordans, an elderly couple. Classy, quiet, the kind of people you'd expect to be old money. They needed someone to watch their granddaughter, Rose, for a few hours each day while their housekeeper was on vacation. They were busy managing some construction projects for one of their companies. "Rose mostly keeps to herself," Miss Jordan said.
When she handed me the keys on the first day, "You won't have to do much." "You can count on me," I replied, giving her my best smile. She smiled back and left the mansion to me and Rose. "I'm going to play PUBG in my room," Rose announced, before disappearing upstairs. She was a tomboyish 12-year-old, fair-skinned and reserved. A perfect arrangement for someone like me who wasn't into forced conversation. The first 2 days breezed by. Rose stayed in her room most of the time, and I was left to my own devices. But on the third day, things took a strange turn. The Jordans were acting odd. They seemed anxious, casting uneasy glances up the staircase. "Miss Hartley," Mr. Jordan began gravely, "you know we're involved in sensitive business matters." I nodded, and he continued, "Sometimes we have to bring confidential information home, so we kindly ask that you not go upstairs." I hesitated, but finally nodded. "Understood," I said. "It's just for a few days," he added. "We've even moved Rose downstairs. That's how serious this is." They left shortly after, but his warning lingered. Here's the thing about me. I'm bad at following rules. The minute someone tells me not to do something, that's when I want to do it the most. You can probably guess what happened next. Just 15 minutes after they left, I crept up the stairs, curiosity gnawing at me. The old wood creaked under my feet, heightening my nervousness. What could they possibly have up here? Money? Something illegal? I hadn't even reached the top of the stairs when I heard it, a guttural scream full of pain and terror. "Is someone there? Please, help me before they come back." The voice pounded on the door at the end of the hallway, and my heart nearly stopped. I was terrified. Who are you?" I stammered, my mouth dry. "They put me in here. They're evil. Please, hurry," the voice pleaded. I edged closer, my hand reaching for the doorknob, torn between fear and the urge to help. Maybe he was a victim, someone the Jordans had trapped. I couldn't just walk away. "How did you get in there?" I whispered. "They locked me up. You have to help before it's too late," the voice implored. My heart was like a nightclub speaker in my chest. My mind was running through 1,000 scenarios, trying to understand what was happening. I fought the silent battle between turning and running away and just opening the door. I chose to go with stupid. I was inches from touching the handle when I felt a presence behind me. "Step away from the door." I turned to see Mr. Jordan standing there, a pump-action shotgun in his hands, Miss Jordan by his side. I froze. "Don't kill me," I mumbled, glancing frantically around, but there was nowhere to run. "Please," I whispered, pleading, as Mrs. Jordan's gaze softened. "This gun isn't for you, child," she said gently. "Please, come downstairs. We'll explain everything." Confused, I followed them, throwing one last look at the door and the screaming man behind it. That was 6 months ago. I still babysit for the Jordans whenever their housekeeper is away, and Rose and I have become close. Once they explained, I even felt sorry for them. The man in that room, he was Rosie's father, their son. He had several mental disorders and had spent years in and out of institutions. Sometimes he broke out and came home, where the Jordans would care for him until the facility came to take him back. They couldn't always bring themselves to call the authorities right away. Rose needed to see her father, even if it was just for a little while. But his episodes could be dangerous. That's what Mr. Jordan had meant when he said, "The shotgun isn't for you."
I had never been one for urban legends. Ghost stories were just that, stories. So when we moved to Stull, Kansas, I wasn't fazed by the shadowed trees that loomed unnaturally or the uneasy stares of the townspeople as we unloaded the moving van. Sure, there was something unsettling about the place, but I shrugged it off as small-town strangeness. Our new house was too perfect. I mean, a spacious home in this economy for such a low price. "This one's a steal," the real estate agent had said with a strange smile. Maybe it was too good to be true. We settled in, but rarely left the house since I worked remotely. My mom and two sisters, Zoe and Natasha, were the ones interacting with the town. They started complaining almost immediately. "There's something wrong with this place," Zoe murmured one evening, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "I swear, people are just watching us, like they're waiting for something," Natasha added, her eyes flickering nervously towards the darkened windows. Mom tried to reassure them. "We're just new here, give it time." None of us had any idea just how wrong she was. The first time I noticed the blood, I was coming back from a late-night grocery run. It was barely visible at first, just a dark smear in the driveway, almost blending into the asphalt under the moonlight. But as I got closer, the metallic scent hit me. Blood. Fresh and thick. "What the hell?" I muttered, scanning the empty street. No one was around. I felt the hairs on my neck standing on end. But I tried to rationalize it. An animal, maybe? Some sick prank? Zoe and Natasha were always pulling stunts like that. When I asked them, though, they both looked genuinely confused. "No idea." Mom dismissed it as kids being kids, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, the blood was gone. Cleaned up, no trace of it at all. That's when the real terror began. The blood returned the next night. More of it. This time, it wasn't just a smear. It was a thick pool, as though something had been slaughtered right there in front of our house. And yet, there was no sign of anyone or anything. No footprints, no drag marks, just blood. Panic crept up my spine. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. I installed a Ring doorbell camera, determined to catch whoever or whatever was behind this. That night, I stayed awake, watching the live feed with my mom and sisters. At 3:12 a.m., the notification came. Motion detected. We all huddled around the screen, expecting to see a raccoon or a stray animal. Instead, we saw shadows. Dark figures standing in a circle in our driveway. There were at least a dozen of them, draped in long black cloaks that seemed to absorb the light. Their heads were bowed, their faces obscured by deep hoods. We exchanged terrified glances as one of the figures stepped forward. He was tall, far taller than any normal man, and he held something in his hands. A chicken. We watched in horror as the figure raised a gleaming knife and, with a sickening slash, severed the chicken's head. Blood sprayed, pooling in the exact spot where I had seen it before. The rest of the figures chanted in a low, guttural tone. Their voices emerged into something primal, something ancient. We froze, unable to tear our eyes from the screen. Then, all at once, the figures stopped. They stood motionless, as if sensing they were being watched. Slowly they turned, every single one of them, their hoods tilted up, and though their faces were hidden, I felt their eyes piercing through the camera, staring directly at us. A message flashed on the screen. Connection lost. None of us slept that night. How could we? When morning came, we went outside and saw the blood again, still fresh and glistening in the early light. The camera footage was gone, wiped clean as if nothing had ever been recorded. We called the police, desperate for help. But when they arrived, they were dismissive. "There's no footage on your camera, ma'am," one of the police officers said, his tone flat, almost mocking. "Probably just some teenagers messing with you. You'll be fine." "No, I saw them. They were performing some kind of ritual." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "This is Stull, Kansas, ma'am," he said with his voice lowering ominously. "There are things in this town you do not want to understand. My advice, don't go looking for answers. Not here." I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. What the hell did he mean? The blood returned every night after that, and every night we watched the same ritual unfold, cloaked figures, a sacrifice, and those unseen eyes always watching, always knowing. We tried to leave, but the town wouldn't let us. Every attempt to sell the house was mysteriously thwarted. Buyers would back out at the last second, or deals would collapse for no apparent reason. The townspeople grew colder, their stares more intense, more predatory. One evening, as I laid awake in bed, I heard a soft tapping at the window. I turned, expecting to see rain or branches swaying in the wind, but there, pressed against the glass, was a pale hand, a child's hand, streaked with dried blood.
The one thing that everyone agrees on when it comes to cults is that it's impossible to tell if you're in one. Everything just makes sense. The rituals, the teachings, and all of it just blends into a beautiful rhythm that you can't help but dance to. Even if people tell you that there's something off, you just brush it off. I'm very familiar with this subject because a year ago, I was in a cult, and the experience almost killed me. I grew up in a family that put the D in dysfunctional. My parents fought all the time, and my two older sisters were rebellious, drug-addicted high school dropouts. It made for interesting family dinners. As a consequence, I spent most of my time alone. I would play video games, listen to music, and browse the internet. I really liked exploring the fathomless depths of the internet, scrolling through images, videos, and a bunch of other things that caught my interest. I only left my room to go to school, where I could count each second until I could go back home to my computer. I didn't have any friends, so school didn't excite me like it did to other girls my age. So that was pretty much my life. School from Monday to Friday, then I'd come back to my computer. The clicking of the keys on my keyboard, competing with my parents' loud voices in the background. They fought every day except Sunday. Sunday was church day. My parents were devout Catholics and would never miss Mass. Naturally, that meant all of us were dragged to church along with them. Even Anna and Kate. We were the perfect family at church. From looking at us, you'd never guess that my parents had been fighting just the day before, or that Anna and Kate hadn't spent the evening passed out from drinking too much whiskey. "You don't bring your flaws to the house of the Lord," my father would always say. Even though I loved spending time alone, I was lonely. I longed for companionship, for friends who would understand me and wouldn't try to use my family drama against me. I couldn't trust the other kids from school, so I turned internet forums, not the regular kind like Reddit, but the ones on the dark web. I know what you're probably thinking, and you are right. The dark web is dangerous, but I had a good reason for searching there. For the longest time, I have always felt this pit in my soul that can't be filled, a profound emptiness that I can't explain. I felt it instinctively in my being that the people who I'd been able to connect with could only be found on the dark web. Among the many forums I browsed through, one stuck out to me. "I am tired of pretending I'm praying during service. I hate this. I can't wait to move out.
The company I work for is very religious. If you don't show up for prayer, say goodbye to any chances of being promoted. I found the form intriguing. I hated being forced to go to church, particularly because my parents were hypocrites. And I realized that so many others had their own bones to pick with religion. Did I hate religion? Did I hate God? Was that where the darkness I felt in my soul came from? The messenger said all our problems were a result of us not speaking clearly to God. We would have meetings every Sunday. Over 40 people connected from all over the country. We used audio only, no video. The messenger would preside over the meetings. His voice was deep and hypnotic, like the slow, steady roll of distant thunder. When he spoke, it felt as if he was reaching to the deepest corners of your mind, soothing every doubt and fear with his calming, reassuring tone. Each word was carefully chosen, delivered with a rhythm that lulled you into a sense of security and trust. It was a voice that commanded attention and obedience, making you feel as if he held the answers to all of life's questions. We need to speak to God. We need to tell him how we feel. Prayer will not reach him. Prayer will not make him listen. But we are the chosen. Through the rituals we shall speak, and we will make him listen. With every meeting, the messenger's teachings sank deeper and deeper into me. My day-to-day life was meaningless. Nothing else mattered except the ritual. Even the fighting at home didn't faze me anymore. My parents didn't matter. My drug-addicted sisters didn't matter. Soon I would be speaking to God. Finally, the day came for the ritual. The waiting had been excruciating, but it was finally over. Tears of joy streamed from my eyes as I opened my window and snuck out into the night. There were already people when I arrived at the meeting place. It was in the backyard of a giant mansion a couple of miles from our home. I had to use the bus to get there. I could see figures encircling a bonfire. All of them were dressed in black robes. There was an unearthly silence in the air, broken only by the crackling of the fire. The air smelled of incense and destiny, like a charged atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I was surprised to see that most of the people there were close to my age, with just a few middle-aged individuals sprinkled among the teens. A girl handed me a robe, and I put it on and joined the others. A few minutes later, the messenger arrived. He was tall, with a scraggly beard and very long hair. His robe was white as snow. Here we are gathered, brothers and sisters, to send a message, for we are all messengers today. He spoke for about an hour, and we listened. The girl who had given me the robe handed out plastic bottles full of a clear liquid, and we all drank without hesitation. We were past being suspicious. By the time I finished my bottle, my mind was a jumble of discordant thoughts. I felt hot, like a volcano was about to erupt from within me. The messenger's voice had risen, inching towards a crescendo. Today we say unto God, take back this gift that we never asked for. We reject it, and we reject you. A roar rose unbidden from my lips, and everyone around the fire echoed it. The girl went around again, handing everyone an athame, a ritual knife. This was it, the final stage of our communication with God. A rejection of the gift of life. The heat inside me had intensified. My vision was getting blurry, and my hands were shaking as I clasped the athame. Suddenly, the messenger let out a guttural scream and plunged his athame into his chest. Blood welled from the wound like a spring, darkening his pristine robes.
My athame was descending towards my chest when someone tackled me from behind. I don't remember clearly what happened after that, but I remembered my rage. How dare someone stand in the way of my message? It turned out that the FBI had been monitoring our online community for a while. Initially, they assumed it was harmless until they started noticing that it had the trappings of a cult. Everyone says that we got lucky that they found us when they did. If they had been a moment too late, we would have all joined the messenger in ritual suicide. I don't like to think about it. The thought of what I almost did to myself scares me. Therapy can't take that fear away. It goes without saying that I will never visit the dark web again.
I don't have the right personality to work in the service industry. I just can't put up with the shit. That's why I don't bother trying to get a job at McDonald's when all my friends were flocking there. My anger issues could never. But I needed money that summer, and that's how I found myself signing up for a babysitting job. I figured it was better to deal with a spoiled kid than a bunch of spoiled adults asking for more fries and extra hot sauce on their burger. I figured wrong. The job ad hadn't provided a lot of details, but since they were offering to pay double for what my friends were getting for flipping burgers, I didn't worry too much about it. This was my chance to make some cash before going to college. The house was an old Gothic mansion, dreary and imposing, complete with a portcullis and weathered gargoyles. It made me think of all the horror movies I'd watched, and that made me a little uneasy. The job is simple enough, miss. My wife and I travel a lot, so we need someone to watch our son, Jamie. He's a sweet, sweet boy, the man said. He was tall and pale, with bags under his eyes, and dressed in an ill-fitting gray suit. He looked like someone who had just surfaced from a 2-week bender, not the CEO of a successful startup. As he mentioned when he introduced himself, Mr. Brown he asked to be called. He went on, explaining a few things about the house. Security, the kitchen, feeding the cat, stuff like that. I tuned him out. Show me the kid already, I thought to myself. As though he had heard me, Mr. Brown cast a long look at me and spoke. Come, I'll introduce you to Jamie. He turned on his heels and walked down a dark passage. I followed him into the bedroom at the end of the hall. It didn't look like your typical 8-year-old's room. For one, it was very clean, and the artwork plastered on the walls had a mature feel. It wasn't half-naked models or anything, but it was just odd. This is your new babysitter. Her name is Kesha, Mr. Brown said. The small figure on the bed didn't respond. He just gave me a quick once-over, then returned to his tablet. But in that brief moment, our eyes met. I felt something. Those blue eyes were heavy, like the eyes of a man who has been to war. They had no place on the face of a cute 8-year-old boy. I felt the unease mounting. Funny enough, my first few weeks at the mansion were a breeze. Jamie mostly kept to himself. I'd check in on him here and there, but most of the time he just was glued to his phone. That meant more free time for me to gorge myself on delicacies in a well-stocked fridge and stream my favorite shows on their massive TV. It was towards the end of my first month when I started to notice the cameras. There were lots of them all over the house, which I found very creepy. Oh, they're just for extra security and to watch Jamie. To make sure he doesn't get into any mischief, you know? Mr. Brown had explained with a grin. It was odd, but I could get behind it, so I put the cameras out of my mind, until one day. I was passing Jamie's room when something drew me inside. He wasn't there. He'd fallen asleep on the couch after lunch. His closet door was slightly open, so I approached it and pulled it open. My lower jaw almost hit the floor. The entire closet was full of guns, Glocks, AR-15s, and a sea of ammunition. It was almost enough artillery to start a small war. I was trying to warp my mind around it when I heard a voice behind me. Daddy doesn't like it when I look.
My heart stuttered. I turned to see Jamie standing right behind me. I hadn't seen him come in. "What?" I stammered. "Daddy doesn't want people looking at the guns. That's why he moves them a lot," the boy said nonchalantly. "The other babysitter saw them, and now she's gone," he continued. I stared back at him, trying to comprehend what he was saying. "What do you mean, the other babysitter?" Silence. "Jamie, what happened to the other babysitter?" I asked, frantic. But Jamie just giggled and ran out of the room. I was about to run after him when I heard the sound of a car outside. My blood turned to ice. Mr. Brown was back. I quickly grabbed my purse and ran out of the house. I passed Mr. Brown in the driveway, and he just stared at me, dumbstruck. "Kesha?" I just kept sprinting, and in seconds, I was out of the still-open gate. I looked back just once and saw Mr. Brown looking at me. His face was pensive. I never went back there. Now you're probably thinking that I went to the police or reported to someone, but I didn't. I was too afraid. I didn't know what to report. And what would happen if I did? I still see Mr. Brown sometimes, but he doesn't say anything, so I just kept walking. But sometimes I wonder.